And we're live.
Hello. Hey, everyone. Welcome back to the final live stream in our three-part journey through Codecademy's evolution. Today, we're looking at one of our brand new courses, Intro to Generative AI. I'm Corey Stieg, Codecademy's content marketing manager, and I'm joined by Fede Garcia Lorca, our community manager, who you probably recognize from these live streams and forums and Discord, as well as Adam Herman, curriculum manager at Codecademy, who will be walking us through this lesson. And then over in the chat, we have Alicia Grama, a senior curriculum developer who is on hand to answer all of your questions live. So in case you haven't heard, it's Codecademy's birthday tomorrow. We're turning 12, almost a teenager. The tech world has changed a lot since we started out in 2011. And one of the biggest transformations happened just last year when the research company OpenAI launched the generative AI chatbot, ChatGPT. And I'm curious, how many of you here use ChatGPT to code or for work or just for fun? Let us know in the chat. We recently launched a bunch of brand new AI courses and case studies that'll teach you how to use and build AI systems like these in a thoughtful, responsible, and inventive way. But today, Adam's going to show us how to make an original children's book with generative AI using our free beginner-friendly course, Intro to Generative AI, as a guide. This is a fun use for AI, but it's also a very practical one if you say need some more bedtime stories in your rotation, or you're a teacher of young children, or you just need a clever gift idea for the kid in your life. But keep in mind that you can go and take this course whenever you want on your own time, and it's linked in the description below. Before we get into it, let me tell you a little bit about Adam. He started as a classroom teacher before moving into tech, and now he's the curriculum manager at Codecademy, where he does strategy work for articles and Codecademy docs, and has recently been working on producing new generative AI content for us. Hi, Adam.
Hey, Corey. Thank you.
I wanted to ask you a question before you jump into it. Do you use generative AI tools in your daily life? And if so, how?
That is a great question, Corey. So I think what's so interesting in general about like this moment with generative AI is that we are in kind of like a state of play with it. This is such a different, cool, interesting technology, and we are still constantly finding new ways of integrating it both into our work lives and into our personal lives. And something that was really drove this home for me was like a month or 2 months ago. I am a fairly mediocre chef, but I try, and I wanted to make a meat sauce, and I was very intimidated. So I went to ChatGPT and I said, I'm a beginner level chef. I want to make a meat sauce. I want it to be this many servings. What do I do? And it spit out a whole recipe for me. And the part where it got really, really cool was I can then ask, okay, well, how do I get oil out then? Or how do I chop the garlic properly? So you could keep digging in a way that you don't get with things like a search tool or other research tools. And
did it taste okay? That's what I'm wanting to know.
Surprisingly, yes. There is a screenshot. Thank you for asking. There's a screenshot of the recipe on my phone. I'm very proud of it. So yes, the robot had good taste in food somehow.
Love it.
Thank you. And that's the kind of thinking I think we're all working on, and something I hope to encourage in all of you from today is not just what can these technologies do, it's how can they interact with each other? How can they interact with our lives to change how we work and interact? So I'm going to share my screen with all of you. And let's get into this course we'll be going through. So the course is Intro to Generative AI. And as the name implies, this is a introductory course going through different types of generative AI tooling and how people are using it. We'll also be going into, as Corey implied earlier, how to use this technology responsibly and some of the interesting ethical conversations happening in this space right now. I am not going to go too much into how to program with generative AI. We do have a lot of really great content around that. This is more for people looking to see what this technology is and how people are using it. So what are we going to cover? We're going to be doing an intro to the course and what it is. I'll be going into this generative AI content workflow. So I'll be showing you, as I create this children's story, how these different technologies can be used together and what responsibilities we have as human users to make sure that the content is accurate and safe, and as well as going into those ethical considerations I talked about before. And then finally, we're going to do a wrap up with some Q&A between myself and Fede. So over this, you should be learning what generative AI is, the different types of generative AI and their use cases, and as I said before, those ethical concerns and considerations. So let's hop into the course. So the course, as I said, is Intro to Generative AI. And the author of this course, Alicia Grama, is actually in the chat here today. So she's here to answer any specific questions you may have about the course content. So before anything else, just what is generative AI? Generative AI is a very advanced learning model that is trained on millions of different texts, images, code samples, and what it is more than anything is a synthesizer. So it can take all of that information, look for certain patterns, and create an output. So to address the first thing is it intelligent? Depends how you define intelligence. A generative AI could not create something wholly new, per se. What it does is create an amalgamation of other things that have been input into it. If you want to get philosophical about it, that's everything that anyone makes is that, but obviously it doesn't make it in a self-conscious way, which is arguably where that intelligence happens. But whether or not it's AI, it is really cool and very inventive and efficient in what it can do. And what we're trying to figure out is, at what point does the work that the AI can do end and human work begins? And how I typically have learned to divide it, there's a great book called Range by an author named David Epstein. And he talks about the difference between kind systems and wicked systems. A kind system is something like chess. It's something like maybe certain types of legal work where it's happening within a very set system in which there are defined rules. AI do very, very well in kind system problem solving. It's why AI, initially when it came onto the scene, one of the most high profile things it could do was play chess. Humans are very good at wicked problems. They are good at high level strategy, taking disparate pieces of information and creating something cohesive out of it. So throughout this, I'll be showing you how to use AI to get to a point that you can begin as a human iterating on what you're using and making it something wholly better and original and suited to your purposes. So the first thing we'll be talking about is text-based generative AI. This is probably the most famous or splashiest of the technologies that we've seen. Most famously ChatGPT, but there are also resources like Bard that you can use. I'll point out that within this course, we have a fake GPT that we have a really brilliant interactive developer named Wesley on the team who made this for us, and it simulates ChatGPT right in our learning environment. So I can click that and click play, and it will generate an answer similar to in the ChatGPT experience. ChatGPT is right now the most famous, but you also have other resources like Bard produced by Google that are very popular. I would say, like anything else, different tooling has different strengths and weaknesses. ChatGPT, in my experience, is a little bit more quote unquote creative in what it can come up with. Whereas Bard, I think, is stronger as a research tool in that it has built-in citations. So it's August. If you're in a southern state, you've already started school. If you're in New York, where I live, school's starting up in a couple of weeks, and then you're an educator, maybe thinking about how to use these technologies in the classroom. That's a situation where I may recommend something like Bard and its better citation, unless you're doing something like a creative writing exercise, which is what we'll be doing now, actually. So I'm going to take ChatGPT and share that here. And I want to create this children's story. Now, on a personal note, I am a proud uncle of two 5-year-old nephews. They are entering first grade this year. And like many 5-year-old boys, they love dinosaurs and they love Jeeps. And I want to, as a start of the school year gift, make them a story. So something I think is really cool about ChatGPT is if you're not sure where to get started with your prompts, you can just ask for a prompt. So I'm going to open this up and I'm going to ask it for 5 prompts for a children's story about twin brothers who go on an adventure on a dinosaur island. To be clear, in terms of dinosaur island, I'm thinking more Savage Lands from X-Men versus the island in Jurassic Park. I would not send a child to the island in Jurassic Park. That would just be irresponsible. But of those 5 prompts I asked for 2 prompts that would be funny, 2 that would be scary, and 1 that would be random. This is a way of me engineering my prompt to see different options. This is me leveraging what this generative AI can do versus me acting as myself in a brainstorming capacity. So I'll ask that to run, and we can see some of these options come up. And we have a Dino Race Day, Dino Picnic Party, Lost in the Dark, Roar of Doom, love a pun, fantastic, and Dino Dance Fusion. We've also named the twins Max and Leo. That's fun. And I'm looking through, and I think the picnic party sounds good. So I'm going to copy this and paste it, and we're going to continue. But I'm also going to refine this prompt a little bit more. So I'm going to type, create a 1,000 to 1,500 word story about off of the following prompt. And I'll click play. And we'll watch that story show up. Now, this is where this human AI relationship comes in. I am not going to take this story and immediately read it to my nephews. There may be things that are not age appropriate. There may be things that are nonsensical. There may be things just that I know within my own personal taste, I wouldn't want in a story. So that's where I am going to go in and refine that process. But just in the length of me giving that explanation, this entire story was generated. And I can copy it to this clipboard and paste it separately where I can continue to work on it. So going back to the course, we're going to talk a bit more now about image-based generative AI. So what I just showed you was chat and some of those different techniques for the prompting process within chat. And now we're going to do image. Image, very similar whereas instead of being trained on text, these generative AIs have been trained on images, so different art styles, schools, kind of considerations like that allows us to make some really cool stuff. And it is technically text to image. We are inputting text and getting an image back. So generate a futuristic version of the Mona Lisa, and we might get something like this. Now, for the purposes of this live stream, I'm going to be using DALL-E 2, but I encourage you to look into other resources like Midjourney, Stable Diffusion. Like I said, with Google Bard and ChatGPT, different tools have different strengths and weaknesses, and I encourage you to explore that. There are also more professional resources that you can pay for to use. Because this is based off of a free course, I'll just be going through free or fairly inexpensive resources with you today. So I have DALL-E up here, and I'm, as Corey mentioned at the beginning of the presentation of the live stream, my background is as a history teacher, and I am a dork for a good map. Love a map. And I think that's something that would really enhance this story. So I'm going to ask, create a map of a dinosaur island in the style of a 1600s nautical map. When I say a nautical map, I'm thinking of those, kind of old school maps where you have the dragon in the corner and, there's sea monsters all over the place. And this is what we've gotten here are a few of these different options that we can click and go through. And I have to say, I kind of love this one. I love the abstract shapes. I like how there's this idea of signage, but I'm also curious if we can drill down on just this format a little bit more. So I'm going to click on variations. And this is a way of continuing to prompt and guide this machine to give us an output that we want. Ultimately, generative AI is still a computer, and computers want nothing more than to make us happy, but we need to ask them for what we want correctly. And this is an example of that. The more specific and targeted our prompts, the better the output is going to get. And we have some more of these maps, more of this weathered style. I actually like this one. I like that there's kind of this foggy area around that makes it feel much more mysterious. And you'll notice here that I have the option to save this, share it, download it. And it's from here I may move it into something like a Photoshop where I can continue to edit it and work on it. And I think this will be a great cover or companion piece to our story. So before I go to the next one, I'm curious, Fede or Corey, are there any questions in the chat?
I'm taking a look. Seems like we are answering them as they come, so we're good.
All right, fantastic. I'll just keep on keeping on them. All right. All right, this is actually a really good thing to know. So you'll notice that this hasn't loaded for me yet. I can just go over here and say restore default workspace, and that will allow me to see this applet again. So the next thing we're going to be talking about is audio-based generative AI. This is something I think is both really cool and probably one of the most interestingly challenging generative AI to utilize compared to image and text. So this is something that can be used in things like music creation, audio creation. While we're getting into some of those ethical considerations, think about how different artists have very distinct musical styles. So if you're creating generative music, are you allowed to say, I want this to sound like a Bob Dylan song, where that's an artist who has a very specific sound and feel to his music. There was a really interesting case fairly recently of someone posting a song on Spotify that sounded like a Drake and The Weeknd song, and it was entirely made through generative music. Where it's less ethically messy is if you're a video editor, if you are trying to maybe get started with mixing music and playing around with that yourself, it's a great way of quickly creating a background track to take and then use as a base to work on. So similar as this, create a common song, and we have this recording here. I was fortunate enough to get a trial into Music LM, which is Google's attempt at getting started with generative music. It's free and it's very fun to play around with. So the reason why I said this was interestingly challenging is, our eyes are our primary sense, right? So we're very good at describing things we see, and we're very good at communicating. So for asking for a text or asking for an image, we intuitively know how to be very exact in what we ask for. I do not have a particularly strong background in music theory, so I can't ask this program to be specific, to ask for it to be in a certain chord or something like that. I don't know how to do that. But what I find really cool about this tool is that it can work within a certain mood. So I had that up there before, but I'm going to say a happy song with an adventurous tune, good for exploring a jungle. And I'm going to see how it does with that. It's going to give it a moment to look at. And I actually like this quite a bit. I apologize. I'm not sure if you're able to hear the audio on your end, but it came in a really interesting way. What I do find with Music LM is it can sound a little tinny, which is really interesting to me. I'm not sure why that is, but again, this is where you can take this, download this track, and go forward. I'll also add that there's a really cool rating system that they have. This is how they're training their AI. So for every prompt, you actually get 2 song options. And I actually like this one more. So I'm going to give it the trophy, got a little confetti. Oh, all right. I'm glad to hear that you were able to hear it. And from here, you can click it and download it or send feedback and continue to work on it. All right. So let's go back over to the course. Oh, so right now, I now have my text, I have my cover, and I have background music to play. Now, there's other things I could do. I could get a voice to text to read it out. Although most voice to text tools are not generative AI, they may use AI, but generative AI is a fairly specific thing. And I may want to create a video, which would be the next slide. Now, I am not going to take you through that process just because video editing is obviously a more extensive process. We would be here for the next hour as I click through and check audio levels. That's not going to be fun for anyone. But I will talk a little bit. I think it's having a little trouble because I'm zoomed in. That's okay. So this is really interesting, though. And there's been a lot of very interesting controversy around the applications of AI and video. You know, there was Prince's likeness being used during the Super Bowl in Minnesota a couple of years ago. A lot of this current strike in Hollywood is around actors being paid a lump sum to have their AI likeness used in perpetuity by studios. And what does that mean? And that's a really interesting place of what we'll be talking about in a bit, which is this intersection of new technology and ethics of what does a technology like this represent for people's labor, for their control over their likeness. These are things that we'll have to consider over the coming years, and we'll have to figure out a lot very quickly. On the plus side, generative AI videos boost productivity. It allows you to create things faster and will likely lead to furthering this, really incredible artistic explosion we've seen since YouTube was invented, of this democratization of art and an overall increase in quality. So I'm really excited to see what generative video can do, as long as we're using it in a way that isn't alienating for people. And that is something, if you're someone who is considering using generative video themselves, to consider. All right. Risks and limitations of generative AI. I really like this. And this is something I'll say is really important to us at Codecademy, is, as I've said a couple of times, this technology is really exciting. And there's so much it can do and so much it will do as a transformative thing. But we need to also understand it for what it is so that we don't overly rely on it or use it irresponsibly. So the first thing I'll say is, at least for now, these AIs view any information that's input into them equally. So it won't necessarily know what information is private versus what information is public that you would put in. So you'll notice when I was creating this story, I didn't add the names of my nephews. I also didn't add a picture of them when I was playing around with an island map for DALL-E. That's because there's a chance that once I put in that information, that now lives within the generative AI and may be used in future models. There's a lot of controversy right now. I was reading even this morning that the New York Times may be suing OpenAI because of how much ChatGPT was trained on the New York Times articles. I've also seen comic artists who have very specific styles or viewpoints have their work used through generative AI by different groups, maybe groups who don't represent their political outlook or social outlook, but it still looks like their work. So there's a lot of interesting conversations right now going on of, again, like, how do we use this correctly and responsibly? I'll also add this in terms of data. So ChatGPT is a really good tool for coding. We actually have a case study up right now on how to debug your code using ChatGPT, or how to simulate paired programming with ChatGPT. That's something we'll be having out on the website within the next couple of weeks. But keep in mind, any code you put on to ChatGPT now lives there and is now within that system. So if there is code that is unique to yourself or unique to the organization that you work for, you really should not be testing it within ChatGPT. Another limitation to talk about is hallucination. So hallucination is something really interesting to me because it's something that feels very alien, but is actually something humans do as well. In that what this machine does, what ChatGPT does and other generative AI, is that it looks for patterns and then takes those patterns and says, okay, based off these patterns, I am going to come to these conclusions. And it doesn't know if it's true or false. It just knows that within the pattern, it would make sense for that to be true. So it's the same way of, maybe looking at something and saying, okay, so at Ferris wheels, thinking, okay, that was probably invented by a guy named Ferris, which, by the way, it was. But if it wasn't, that would be a hallucination of, because it's a word and then a thing after it, I am going to assume, okay, actually, that better example. If I'm using duct tape, there is no Mr. or Miss Duck in the world. It's just called duct tape. So that would be a human hallucination, a pattern misunderstanding. And the problem with ChatGPT is that it will deliver this information factually. So this is why, while something like this is a very useful research tool in a limited capacity, you shouldn't use it to make more complex decisions. So to give an example, I recently wanted to take my wife out for a date in Queens, where I live. So I asked for 10 date ideas in Queens for under $30. And I promise I'm generally not cheap. I was just curious to see what would come from it. And what came out was a lot of different answers, but not everything was in Queens. Some was in Brooklyn, some was in Manhattan, because what it probably did was look at hundreds, if not thousands, of websites that have fun date idea or fun cheap date idea lists in New York City and didn't narrow it down correctly. So the process of verification is very important when using generative AI for doing any kind of research. If you're doing something like what I just did, which is a more creative exercise, that's fine. Don't have to worry about that as much. But definitely if you're doing something for work. All right. And last is these ethical questions, which I've been talking about throughout. So things like, where does work begin and end, and how does credit for that work? We are actually talking about this a lot internally at Codecademy. So I help manage something called Codecademy Docs, which is an open contribution tool. And we've had discussions internally of, if someone submits something that was created by a generative AI, did they write it? And we've had conversations, and we still are not 100% happy with the answer that we have, which is, if someone used generative AI as a base and then augmented it and made it their own to a point that it's their own work, that's fine. But that vagueness of, at what point does it go from being more artificially intelligently created versus human created, is a very interesting and sticky question that we'll probably be working through for a while. Again, going back to the writer's strike, just because that's such a big thing in our cultural conversation right now. If someone gets an idea for a TV episode from generative AI and then writes it, do they get credit for that idea? Think about highly serialized shows like a Law and Order or Chicago Fire or Grey's Anatomy. Generative AI could probably write at least the beginning of a script for those shows because they've been going for so long. There's a certain flow and feel to those scripts. So what does it mean for things like that in the future? There's also issues of data and how it's interpreted. So ChatGPT, again, doesn't make assumptions. It merely takes things in and outputs what it sees in terms of the patterns. So if it's looking at things like government data, things like that, and asks for reports, it will not be able to look at it through a human lens, only through exactly what it sees. So there's a lot of stuff where if we don't, again, go through the trouble of verifying, checking, coming to our own conclusions, it can lead to incomplete views of the world. Thank you for someone who said duct. That was, I actually questioned myself. And I was like, is it duck or duct? It is duct. But again, there is no Mr. Duct as far as I'm aware, or Miss Duct. All right, so that is the overview of the course. But again, we have a lot of other really great AI content, both for introductory levels, like our case studies, our docs entries. We have tutorial articles. We have our Intro to ChatGPT course. We have a lot of great content. We also have more advanced AI content that you can check out on our site. We have an AI hub. It's awesome. I would highly encourage you to check it out. So that's everything for my presentation. So if Fede, if you want to do any questions, we can use that time for next 10 minutes.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for the presentation. That was awesome. Very instructive. I think everybody enjoyed it in the chat. Yeah, so I'm going to just ask the chat to collect their thoughts and think about questions that they want to ask you. I'll be reading them through as they come in, and then Adam, you can give us your thoughts and your takes on the questions from the audience. So please do share them in the chat. I will ask you a question of my own while we wait for people to submit their own questions. And I was wondering, looking at generative AI and how the term AI in general is thrown around. You touched on this during the presentation, that generative AI is different. It's very specific type of AI. So do you see that misconceptions of what AI does between the different types or like different flavors of AI? Is that something that you see people confusing and maybe leading up to maybe using AI wrong? Like it's an amazing tool, but you still need to know what is it that is going to give you what to expect?
That's a really interesting question, Fede. I would say there's two aspects to it, right? Which is people are using generative AI, machine learning, and AI interchangeably a lot of the time, and they're not interchangeable. So we had AI in our lives for a really long time, maybe just not in ways we see or ways we think about. So for example, on a lot of our smartphones, we have a Siri or a Google Assistant. Siri actually just turned on for me, so that's on me. Helping out, and it'll creep me out when my phone will say, "Hey, it's 6 a.m. Like you usually take, you eat at this time. So like, do you want to eat breakfast?" And that's so creepy, but it's just pattern recognition. And that's the kind of thing that AI is good for, is that I'll put into my calendar a lot, like eat breakfast, or I'll, a better example would be on Thursdays at 6 o'clock, I call my parents, and I might get a reminder from my phone to call my parents. That's AI. Or the ranking we see on social media of knowing how to kind of curate our feed a certain way is an AI being used. That's not a generative AI. It's not as smart as what we see, but it is an implementation of that. Machine learning, I don't have the strongest background in, admittedly. But I'll say again, it's a use of large amounts of data to come to different conclusions. It's not necessarily generative. There's perhaps more of a human component in there. In terms of how people think about it, we're already seeing companies lay off certain employees because they think they'll be able to replace them with generative AI. I think they're going to be sorely surprised how much they miss people, because I think this will not destroy jobs so much as displace them. So it's not that a job will fundamentally disappear. It's that perhaps a starting job as a copywriter, you'll be doing a lot more copy editing of content that generative AI created, which is ultimately, in my opinion, probably a little bit more interesting work. You're thinking a little bit more strategically about content. But I think people are in a little bit of a rush to say this is going to like utterly change the world. I don't think we're there quite yet.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you for your answer. I see a question in the chat from Matthew. Has someone who is learning to program at the present moment, would you recommend using AI to assist with code now at an early stage of learning, or learn to write code without AI and use it later?
That's such an interesting question. I've wondered about this a lot myself. Everyone remembers being in math class and being told, hey, well, everyone over 25, 26 remembers being in math class and being told, you're not going to have a calculator everywhere you go. So you need to learn how to do math this way. And surprise, we have calculators on us everywhere we go. And I do wonder, is that going to be the case with coding? There's so much that's going to be taken care of you through the generative AI that the amount you'll have to learn or how you'll learn will be different. What I will say, though, if we stay within this math example, is even if you are using a calculator, you still need number sense. You still need to know the rules of math and how different equations relate to each other for how to implement them. So I would say if you are just getting started out learning to code, it's still important to learn how that code works, what's unique about that language, what it does, and the mechanics for it before going to generative AI. Because if you go to generative AI immediately, you'll be more using something without fully understanding it. And especially if you plan to work as a programmer, that puts you in a very vulnerable position.
It sounds to me a little bit like the analogy of the bicycle and walking, where the bicycle will make you move faster, but you still need to know where you're going.
I love that. I was also thinking it's like the difference between knowing how to drive a car and being a mechanic.
Yeah.
I know my car has an engine. I know it has 4 wheels, but I couldn't fix it.
I think it's very self-explanatory for anyone that thinks that AI can do it all. If you just don't have, like you said, any knowledge, any sense of the code, it becomes very obvious very quickly that you're not going to get very far using these AI tools. Let's see, looking at the chat. Somebody said generative AI doesn't always give facts, but rather recognizes patterns. This can become very convincing. How can we ensure that we don't fully believe it? I guess the question is about how to vet the answers you're getting from AI. How do you know? Because it can be very convincing sometimes. It's just, the AI sounds like it knows what it's talking about.
Yeah. This may come as a surprise to people, but sometimes there's misinformation on the internet, just in general. And again, this is the former history teacher in me of it's always good to verify information. And we know there are certain sources that are more trustworthy. There are Wikipedia is actually shockingly trustworthy in a lot of ways. Respected news organizations, scientific journals that we can check in on information. I would say, again, it depends what kind of information you're looking for. If you are planning a vacation and you're just looking at things to do in Dallas, that's probably fine. You don't have to worry about it too much. Maybe if you plan to book something, you'll end up verifying it that way. However, if you are looking up something more scientific, then yes, you should, or certain treatments for something. First of all, call a doctor. Don't use generative AI to treat a cold. But also make sure to verify. I'll also say,
I feel like some people are worried about that when they talk about job displacement. What if there's a cheaper medical tier, which is AI enabled, and to talk to a real human, you have to get through an AI first, right?
So that is really interesting. Give me a moment. So a podcast I listened to, it's called Philosophize This, the host is a man named Stephen West. He did a whole episode on generative AI and its meaning, and he actually talked about medicine specifically and how there could be really exciting applications in that there are just so many doctors in the world. And you do see kind of a natural choke point in that you have a lot of people that need care and only a certain amount of doctors who can provide that care. And we don't have it now, but maybe in 5 years, 10 years, there will be a generative AI that is sufficiently trained to accurately provide medical advice to people, at least for low-level things, so that doctors can focus on bigger concerns. I'm thinking specifically of a family member who recently had a child and has been calling my poor cousin who's a pediatrician every 2 days saying, is this normal? Is this normal? Is this normal? Having a generative AI tool that's trained to reliably help provide medical information would really be a game changer for situations like that. But again, we are not there yet.
We're not there yet, right? I think we are. This might be related to what we were just talking about a little bit. There was a user in the chat asking about the degradation of AI by saying if AI-generated content enters the data sets the future AIs will be trained on, do you have some sort of vicious spiral where the data just keeps getting worse and worse because it's sort of feeding itself? Have you read into this? Do you think that this could become a problem?
I have not, but that's scary. Again, it's one of those things of we just need to be mindful of the pitfalls with any new technology and build robust systems to incorporate it and use it responsibly. Like maybe this means, and I've had conversations with people on our data science team about this, that we need to be really disciplined about having clean, clear data before inputting anything into a generative AI, which is, again, something we should be doing anyway, and is a big problem in the field of data is bad data. So we're kind of there already. So it's more of a matter of, again, like making sure we adapt in a responsible way. And I think in terms of it being a spiral, I don't know about that. I could definitely see it getting worse before it gets better because humans are reactive. We like to create a problem for ourselves before we solve it. But I don't think it will cause, some kind of data apocalypse, knock on wood.
Going on about the pattern recognition that you talked to during the presentation, someone is asking in the chat if generative AI could be used to leverage business analytics. So I guess the field of statistics and math is something that Gen AI can work on?
Yeah, so this is where I was talking about different types of tooling. So ChatGPT can do very basic things. So in my own work, I think a lot about search engine optimization. So how well things rank on Google. And you can go on ChatGPT and say, what are best practices for SEO? And it will give you something pretty good. I can't go into ChatGPT and say, give me a full SEO strategy based off like these metrics in the company. Because one, I'd be giving ChatGPT a lot of information about Codecademy that I shouldn't be. And two, it doesn't know enough about the specifics of our context to give good information. In terms of business analytics, that's a long way of me saying, yes, I imagine there is generative tooling that could do that very well. It would likely be a paid tool. And we're in a bit of a Wild West era where maybe in a year or 2 years, there will be a tool with that sophisticated to be able to do that. If there is, I don't know of it yet.
Nice. I think it reminds me, do you feel like this is a bit like the revolution with computers back in the 80s or the 90s, where computers were getting fast enough that they were actually useful to solve scientific questions and problems and simulations? And at the time, there was this problem where you didn't always know why the computer was giving you the answer it was. So it became very important for scientists at the time to know how to ask the right question, so you would know that it's answering your question and it's not just spitting out numbers that you're not really sure what, if they're actually about what you asked the computer. So do you see some similarities with that nowadays with AI, where the ability to craft a good prompt and to know the limits of AI and how far that prompt is going to go, how it's going to be interpreted, it's almost as important as knowing how to use the tool itself? Like your example with looking for restaurants in Brooklyn.
But I can only say yes, that was a great reflection. I agree. Yeah, I think that makes complete sense. And it's also that these technologies happen in stages, where they typically start off invented, existing, being used in very specific circles of specialists. And then you get to where we are, where certain applications are found, potential is understood. And the next phase is building out that infrastructure and systems of use that will allow it to fully be employed in the general population and be as transformative as it has the potential to be. So to go way back, people knew the steam engine was a big deal when it was invented, but it was another 50 years before we had railroads. So we are in the steam engine moment. I'm very interested to see what the railroads will look like.
Fair enough. Someone was asking about completing Codecademy courses and then what? So thinking about the AI content that we've released recently, we have several courses on it. How do you see somebody, do you see these AI courses as something that goes alongside of machine learning and data science courses? Do you think that is something complementary or something that should come before or after? How do you see the catalog for somebody that is data curious, I guess?
I think that's really interesting. I would say it depends what you want your outcome to be. So if you are just looking to understand what generative AI is, you can take these courses, do these case studies to see how you might implement it in your work and in your life, and that may be enough. How we're thinking of it and how we hope to evolve our curriculum over the rest of the year is to really find a way to work it into your workflows and practices, be it as a programmer or a data scientist or a cybersecurity specialist. So we just put out a new data science course. Alicia, if you could actually put that in the chat, that covers aspects of data science and AI. I'd also say things like machine learning would be a direction to go in if you're interested in the nitty-gritty of how it works. I would say, regardless, and if you're not doing this already, I would encourage you to do so in the chat. Think about those moments at work and recognizing them as, okay, this is a place where I could use generative AI to make my life a little bit easier. And then you can start working to establish yourself on your team, in your company, as a leader who understands how to use this and put yourself in a real position to be successful in that way.
Okay, well, I think that was very solid advice for anyone trying to get into the data field. So we have run out of time for Q&A, and I want to thank everybody for attending today's live stream. If you've attended part 1 or part 2 of our series, thank you again for coming back for part 3. If you haven't, please check out our YouTube channel where you can find the other 2 parts of our 3-part series on the evolution of Codecademy. We're celebrating our 12 years online, so thank you everybody for joining us in this journey. I hope that it was a fun experience. I hope that everybody took something home with them today from Adam. I think it was very, very good. The explanations, I learned a lot today. And I really hope that if you enjoy this content and you want to see more of this content, you consider creating an account with Codecademy, or at least signing up for a free one. Don't forget to subscribe to our socials, Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, that sort of thing, Instagram, so you can stay up to date with all the events that we're having and the ones that we'll have in the future. And thank you again, Adam, for being with us today. Have a good weekend, everybody.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.
All right.